just such a legend, such a great man. I've met him a few times over the years. At charity golf tournaments in Halifax, he'd come out and support Atlantic Canadians, and an amazing person, super funny, just a great guy, and obviously some of the best calls of all time. So super sad to hear that.
Quite honestly, growing up, I think every memory I would have of hockey would be, with his voice echoing. I think it's very identifiable, one syllable, and it's Bob Cole.
I've never had a really good fight with Wendell Clark, and I think it might have been him and Harry Neal, I think, so I remember that. And when you're you're an Ontario kid, it's pretty special when those guys are calling your name out there.
It's not necessarily a specific story, but the most important thing is that all the coaches around the league and all the hockey people around, they trusted him. He was a true pro, and you could tell him anything, and he called a great game. Very respectful, very professional, but I had a good rapport with Bob. I'm from the Maritimes, he's from Newfoundland. He's not a Maritimer, he was a Newfoundlander. But I always had a great rapport with Bob and just had absolutely nothing but respect for him. So the hockey world lost a real good human being today.
Universal love and reverence for the great Bob Cole. Passed away today or last night at the age of 90, and Ron MacLean's here because no one has more stories and more beautiful memories than you of Bob Cole.
Well, David, we're going to try and get Wayne Gretzky and a few of the folks who everybody loves Bob, and that's one of the things. He was revered, as you know, by the athletes. And he was funny, and maybe I'll tell some story. We're going to do this today, tomorrow, and Saturday, of course, the night that he helped to make famous. But just seeing the Florida Panthers on this roll in the playoffs gets me thinking about one thing. And I should also mention, Rick Bowness talks about the Maritimers and Atlantic Canadians. Sidney Crosby had a tradition, and still did it up until the end here, of phoning Bob on the opening day of the season. And when I heard that Sid did that, I thought, well, that's a good idea. I'll start phoning Bob first game of the regular season, first game of the playoffs. And I did talk to Bob on Saturday, and we talked a lot about Glenn Sather and the Edmonton Oilers, because Friday had been the 25th anniversary of Wayne's last game. Anyway, Florida, 11 playoff overtime victories now in a row. Back in 1993, Montreal, as you remember, won 10 straight overtime games. And we were at the Montreal Forum in a morning skate, Kelly's LA Kings, Montreal Canadiens, and Jean Beliveau shows up. And Jean comes over to Bob Cole and he says, isn't this amazing, 10 straight OT wins? He says, it's a funny thing, Bob. I don't think I ever scored in overtime. And Bob says, well, I'm sorry to correct you, Jean, but yes, you did. You scored at the Boston Garden in double overtime, April 24, 1969. And Jean Beliveau says, that is unbelievable. How do you know that? He says, it was my first nationwide broadcast of Hockey Night in Canada on radio. And he passed 55 years to the day, April 24th. So there's a little synchronicity. And also Kelly Rudy, David mentioned his Easter epic. So Bob called that quadruple overtime thriller. Kelly, the next day I was on a plane, and Mike Ridley of the Washington Capitals was on the plane in Washington to fly to Rochester to get us back to Toronto to carry on to the Stanley Cup playoffs. And I didn't want to bother Mike Ridley. He was sitting there crestfallen. They'd lost the night before. He was headed off to a funeral at Thunder Bay. And we waited and waited to take off. And finally, this woman with black leather and raven, beautiful black hair and a boombox on her shoulder gets on the plane and starts going back to the smoking section where Bob Cole was seated. And I said to Mike Ridley, that was Joan Jett. He says, is it? I said, no, I'm just kidding. She looked like a rock star, though, didn't she? Well, it was Joan Jett.
It was.
So we get off look at that. So we get off at Rochester, and Bob, we have to wait for him from the back of the airplane. And he said, well, I had a good chat with Joni, and now they're best friends. So he loved Frank Sinatra, Vic Damone, and Joan Jett. Those are his three greatest singers.
Well, he was a celebrity amongst celebrities, right? I know you have a bunch of stories. Some of the golf stories. Share some of those.
So we're at Kemper Lakes in Chicago, and it's Dick Irvin and Jim Gregory, the late Jim Gregory, and they're playing Bob and me in a match.
Okay.
And we're at the 16th hole at Kemper Lakes, and it's a par 4, 425. I blooped my drive 200 yards. I got 220 to the stick. And Bob Cole comes over to me like he did to Kelly Rudy, told a story earlier about him lining up putts. Bob comes to me and he says, now, he sees me with a fairway. You're not hitting that. You're not going for the stick. You get your 7-iron out. You play it safe. There's water on the right. You just hit a nice 7-iron over here on the left. Even if you make bogey, we're still in the match because we're down 2. I said, no, Bob, honestly, I'm really good with a 5-wood. I'll make this and we'll win the hole. Of course, I drive it in the drink. Right?
Should have laid up.
And to this day, I do not play golf in the Stanley Cup playoffs on the day of a game. And Kelly, you don't either. So I don't know. But I was so traumatized by letting Bob down that I felt I can never go on Hockey Night in Canada guilty again.
Well, as we see a picture of Michael Jordan, where does he fall into
He
this
was
story?
there. He was
Okay.
right behind us at Kemper Lakes. And it was the most amazing thing. He'd never been to Canada at that point, but he joined us on the tee box because every time we would have to wait, Michael Jordan was with us. And he went out 47 points for the Chicago Bulls that night. Joe DiMaggio, here's another one. We never got to Bob's birthday. He was very secretive about his age, not about me, so he never wanted his birthday celebrated, and we rarely got to it. It was June 24th. But we're in New Jersey, 95, and it is June 24th because there'd been a lockout. And at the morning in the hotel, who shows up but Joe DiMaggio? And Bob Cole went and had a beautiful conversation with Joe. So, I mean, it just seemed to follow him everywhere. He was bigger than life, and so were the folks around Bob.
Joe, Joni, MJ, and Bob, right? They all sort of fit hand in hand. You're going to share a lot more of these stories, obviously, on Saturday, Hockey Night in Canada. What about the best legacy that Bob Cole is leaving behind, which is this beautiful family?
That's right. I am so lucky to have known Christian, Hillary, Megan, and Robbie. Robbie's a pilot. Bob had a certification as a pilot. I don't know if you know that. Megan over here. Megan starred in a play Jitters down at Brock University. We went to see her perform, so she kind of followed in. Hillary there, God Hillary. One time Bob was mad at me, as he often was, and you know the feeling, right? But he grabbed my had a T-shirt I was kind of proud of, and he grabbed it and sort of tore it a little bit. So the next day at the golf tournament, his golf tournament, Ballyhaley, St. John's, Newfoundland, the kids came up and presented me with a replica of the T-shirt that Bob had destroyed, and that's where he is funny. But Bob, yeah, when we talk about your legacy, you know, you were a boy that heard Foster say, "Hello, Canada," and hockey fans in the United States and Newfoundland, and that little shout out to Newfoundland. To a young, impressionable kid, let him know that hockey's not a broadcast, it's a bridge. And he made us a family. He you know, Bob, we love you, as you said, David, so beautifully. And we do thank him.
Fiery, passionate, brilliant Bob Cole. There's only one Bob Cole. Thank you, Bob.